NFL free agency and the 2025 NFL draft are both in the books. So in today's video, I want to go over some of the most improved teams heading into the 2025 NFL season. Subscribe and like the video if you guys do go on to enjoy. Let's hop into it. And we are going to begin with the New England Patriots. This was a team last year that just simply put did not have a lot of talent. The coaching staff was weak. The roster in general was really bad. And so far this offseason, they have had home runs after home runs after home runs. Obviously, the first thing we have to talk about is how they've surrounded Drake May with a lot of legitimately awesome weapons. Because obviously last year, the only weapon that they really had to consistently rely upon was like Hunter Henry, Ramondre Stevenson, and like Kendrick Bourne, which obviously those aren't a very great surrounding cast of players you want to have supporting a young quarterback. So obviously Drake May had some good moments, but also a lot of bad moments too. With this new roster built around him though, it looks a lot better, at least on paper. Because offensively speaking, you bring in a Travion Henderson, you bring in a Stephon Diggs, a Kyle Williams, and you basically revamp a lot of the positions on the offensive line, including your left tackle with Will Campbell, your right tackle with Morgan Moses. You also bring in Garrett Bradbury, and not to mention you also drafted Jared Wilson. If you compare this offense this year to what it was last year, it's just a completely different unit, and I truly do believe that Drake May has at least enough people around him to support him. Obviously, it's going to take some time to mesh and to get the scheme down and get the system down, but man, this offense just looks significantly better and a lot more prepared to actually support a young quarterback like Drake May. I think we also should talk about the coaching staff. Bringing in Mike Vrabel to be your new head coach was brilliant. I thought that he was a great head coach for Tennessee. Obviously, it did not end very well there because of some inner conflict between GMs, CEOs, all that sort of stuff. So that was unfortunate. But even though all that was happening, he was a fantastic coach that, let's be honest, took those Titans teams to some pretty deep playoff runs when, frankly, they probably should not have gone on those deep playoff runs. I mean, hell, they had Ryan Tannehill as their starting quarterback. So would say that Drake May has a little bit higher of a ceiling. But even though they targeted a lot of help on the offensive end, they also did a lot of work on the defensive end, and I truly do believe this defense should be significantly better next year. Because defensively speaking, you bring in a Harold Landry, who, let's be honest, is not the greatest player in the world, but still can get you some juice here and there. Milton Williams in the middle is a huge upgrade within the middle of your offense or your defensive line. You pair that with some guys like Robert Spillane, who's your new linebacker, a fantastic leader-like linebacker that's just going to be awesome with Mike Vrabel. And then, of course, bringing in Carlton Davis on a really nice contract to pair opposite of Christian Gonzalez. Again, this was a roster last year that was really bad. It was one of the worst teams in the NFL. They had the 4th overall pick for a reason. They fired their head coach. They bring in somebody with a lot of success and a really nice background. You get a young quarterback last year. You support him with some young pieces like Kyle, Will Campbell, Travion Henderson, and of course, having in veterans like Stephon Diggs and Ramondre Stevenson is just going to make this team that much better. So from last year to this year, I do expect a bit of a jump forward, especially if Drake May continues to progress within his career. And I think by 2026, 2027, I think we might be talking about the New England Patriots as legitimate playoff contenders. I don't think they'll make it next year because I think they need to take that next step, and they still have a couple pieces they need to work on. But if they can fix some of those next issues next offseason, I think this team is definitely heading in the right direction. Next up, let's talk about the Arizona Cardinals. Now, the one thing I have to say about this team, they really didn't touch up the offense quite honestly at all. Because your starting offensive line is still Paris Johnson Jr., Evan Brown, Froholtz, and then, of course, Jonah Williams off the right tackle side. So that's basically the same. They also didn't really draft anyone besides Hayden Connor, so we'll see if he gets any playing time, but I doubt it because he was a super late round pick. And then the receiving core is still Marvin Harrison, Greg Dortch, and Michael Wilson. I mean, nothing really too different from that unit. Same with the running back core, same with the quarterback. The big significant upgrades on this team was on the defensive side of the football, because this team went from being a really poor defense with a lot of flaws to now actually a really solid defense. Because when you look at the depth chart for this team, it's just completely different. Josh Sweat, Walter Nolan, Calais Campbell, Dalvin Tomlinson, all these new additions on the defensive line significantly upgrade this team. This is a team last year that simply put did not have the horses on the defensive end. They did not have a guy who can get to the quarterback at a consistent level. Now you bring in Josh Sweat, who I think can be an 8+ a sack per season type of a guy. You have Calais Campbell, who yes, is super duper old, but man, he can still be a good player for a team. Dalvin Tomlinson, also a little bit older, but still really reliable. You pair that with Darius Robinson, who you're hoping will take a step, BJ Ojolari, who you hope can stay healthy, Zaven Collins, and so many other really good players. And you look at this defense and say, you know what? This defense actually could be pretty legit next year. And for me, if that is the case, if this defense can go from being mediocre to decent to really good next year, which I think they can, then I think this Cardinals team can go from being a fringe playoff team to actually making the playoffs. I think they have the offense. Yes, it was a little inconsistent, but you bring in some new coaches. You have Kyler Murray with Marvin Harrison Jr. for another year. You hope this offensive line and Paris Johnson Jr. can consistently get better, and just everything about this team should be more reliable, more consistent. And if that is the case, and if Will Johnson can stay healthy, which I did not even mention him, but if he's also healthy, he can be your cornerback one. But if everything does go right for this team, which I think there is a chance it does happen, then I think we're talking about this Cardinals team genuinely being one of the better teams in the NFL. Frankly, if I was to do my playoff predictions today, I would have a very hard time not having the Arizona Cardinals make the playoffs, especially if somebody like Will Johnson really does work out, because this team is pretty nice, at least on paper. Next up, let's talk about the LA Rams. Now, admittedly speaking, there's not a lot of changes to their starters or their starting players, but I feel like with what they have done in terms of bringing in impactful players, they've done enough for me to feel really confident that this team can go from being a fringe championship contender to actually being one of the favorites to actually win it all. Let's get this out of the way. Not a lot of changes on this roster, but there's one major one that I think is such a drastic improvement from what they had last year. And for what this team wants to do, it's a perfect fit, and that's Davante Adams. Now, Davante is likely going to fit a role similar to what Odell Beckham's role was when they won that championship. Just sort of an outside receiver who can win deep, can just do a whole bunch of stuff in the intermediate, really form a connection with Matthew Stafford. Obviously, Davante, at this stage of his career, is not the 26-year-old Davante Adams, but he's a lot better than what Odell Beckham was for this team when he was on the roster. So I just look at this and say, you know what, man, you got Puka Nacua, who's just a monster underneath. He can even win deep. He can just do everything this team needs. Pair that with the Davante Adams, who can be a big-time playmaker. Tutu Atwell is still on the roster. Not to mention Terrence Ferguson. I liked the pick. I didn't think he was maybe worth as high of a pick as he ended up getting, but I just think he's a really good player who's going to be an impactful receiving tight end. They're going to run a lot more 12 personnel, and I think Terrence Ferguson's really going to open up this offense a lot more. And I also do expect somebody like Jordan Whittington, who saw some playing time sparingly last year, but with the departure of Cooper Kupp, I would not be surprised one bit if your starting trio of receivers, or maybe a kind of a version of your starting three receivers, is Puka, Davante, and Jordan Whittington, because Jordan can just do a lot of the dirty work that this team wants to do. He's a fine blocker. He just is a hard worker. Tutu is a bit more of a freakish athlete compared to Jordan Whittington, but sometimes this Rams team just likes those hard-nosed receivers that aren't afraid to get physical, and that's what Jordan Whittington would do for this team, especially within the screen game. So I just feel like Jordan Whittington can also play a huge role in this team. Not to mention, you also drafted Jarquez Hunter, which we'll see if he ends up playing a role in this roster, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. And then on the defensive side of things, again, they didn't really do too much, but you did bring in Poona Ford and Pooh Paul Jr., who I think will both be impactful players. Poona Ford will definitely be a nice addition for this team. He's solid against the run. He can also get to the quarterback. So any issues this team had, I think he's just going to cover up a lot of their issues. Again, Pooh Paul Jr., man, he's a little bit undersized, but he's just a really smart, athletic player that, I got to be honest with you, I would not be shocked if he ends up being a starter for this team. I just think he's that good of a player where I don't care he's a little bit undersized and he's only like 6'1" or 6 foot. He looks a little smaller, but man, he's just a baller who can absolutely go. And I also think this, I don't think they're done quite yet making moves. A Jalen Ramsey trade is still definitely on the table. And if that does happen, they very well could end up being my championship favorites. But as we sit here today, I look at this roster. They went from being a almost complete roster that can contend for a championship to, in my opinion, as close to complete as you physically can get. You also were able to keep Matthew Stafford on the roster, which I think is a big plus. And I just look at this team and I say, you know what? This team went from being really good to, in my opinion, one of the best teams in the NFL. And frankly, I do think the Rams have a shot to win it all next year. I think they can beat the Eagles. I think they can beat the Lions. They can compete with anyone. And that's a nice offseason for the LA Rams and definitely heading in the right direction for this team heading into next year. Next up, let's talk about the Carolina Panthers. This is a team, unlike the Rams, that looks completely different in a lot of different ways. Now, offensively speaking, they should be pretty similar to what they've already had from last year. You still have Adam Thielen, you still have Leggett, you still have Coker. Your offensive line is the exact same. Your tight end core is essentially the same, plus Mitchell Evans. The big upgrade for this team was, of course, Tetairoa McMillan, who is just going to be exactly what this team needs. A long, rangy receiver And honestly, I think his skill set actually works quite nicely with this team. Like Thielen can do a bit more in the slot work, a bit more underneath. Same with Coker. He can kind of go in the middle and the outside, wherever you really need him to. Leggett can be your big 50-50 ball winner downfield while also doing a couple other things. Whereas Tet can kind of just be that glue that puts everything together. He's going to be Bryce Young's go-to target. He's going to get a lot of action. I would not be surprised if in his rookie year he gets close to 1,000 or over 1,000 yards, just because Bryce Young is going to feed this guy because he's a long, rangy receiver that you can trust because of how rangy he is. He's a hands catcher. He's good after the catch. Like, there's a lot of things he can do. And for Bryce Young, it's one of those situations where at times the offensive line might collapse and there might be a situation where he has to roll out of the pocket and he has to just throw it up to somebody. And who am I going to throw it up to? 6'5" Tetsuo McMillan or 30-something-year-old Adam Thielen? I'm probably going to throw it up to Tet McMillan, and he's probably going to make a play on it, whether it's a catch or just an incompletion, which is what you want. So in totality, I feel like this is a really good team. You also brought in Rico Dowell to be your opposite running back to Chuba Hubbard, which will be really nice. Rico Dowell is a good player. Not a great player, but I could see him getting 700 yards for this team, maybe a little bit less than that. And then Trevor Etienne can do a lot of work too in sort of the passing game. So offensively, very similar unit with Tet McMillan and Rico Dowell, but man, it's just a really solid unit that if Bryce Young is ready to go, then I think the wheel is up to him. If Bryce Young plays great, but if he doesn't, then I think it's time to move off him because I think he has the pieces around him now to seriously succeed. And then on the defensive side of things, a lot of new pieces. Tershawn Horton, Bobby Brown. Of course, you're bringing in Christian Rosenboom, and then also Trevon Moehrig. Not to mention, you get some new safeties like Lathan Ransom. So even though I don't think this defense is going to be particularly great next year, I expect it to take a sizable step forward. I also did not mention that their draft included Nick Scorin, not to mention Pritzley, Uman Mielen, who I think will both be impactful players that may not start immediately, but I definitely do think that they will push to get a lot of playing time this year. Nick Scorin to me was a first-round talent. Princely Uman Mielen was a second-round or third-round talent. So great pickups for those defensive side of things. Again, want to reiterate here, I do not think this team is going to go from a bad defense to a good defense, but I think they actually have the pieces necessary to take a sizable step forward. Because in this 3-4 defense, you're going to have DJ Wanham coming off the edge. You're going to have Tershawn Horton up the middle, Derek Brown, Bobby Brown. By the way, Derek Brown in and out of himself is a significant upgrade from what they had last year. His injury really sucked for this defense. But you pair that with an improved secondary with some new safeties. Of course, J.C. Horn, you hope, stays healthy. Of course, you have Shaw Smith-Wade, who will continue to kind of stick in that nickel. And then coming off the edge, opposite of DJ Wanham, you might have Nick Scorin, you might have Princely, you might have Jadeveon. And I just think you have a variety of different players. You're also probably hoping that Trevin Wallace can take a sizable step forward in year two. We'll have to wait and see on that. I was not too high on him coming out of college, but I feel like last year you were just throwing bodies out there to start. Whereas I think this year you've taken a step forward where you're actually seeing players that might actually have a future on this team. So that's a good thing for this team. I think offensively, they should take a step forward. They should be a bit more consistent. Bryce Young has all the necessary pieces around him to succeed. A great head coach with a great offensive mind. And defensively, I feel like they are now kind of putting the pieces together of what should end up becoming a solid defensive team in a few years. Maybe not this year. I think they'll probably be bottom 10 defense this year, but at least probably not the worst defense like they were last year. And then I think maybe next year, after a full defensive draft with a bunch of new pieces, I think we'll be talking about this Panthers team putting together a really nice roster in total, not just offensively, but also defensively around Bryce Young. So good offseason for the Panthers. They're definitely heading in the right direction. Next up, I hate to say it, but the New York Giants are actually kind of a good roster. I mean, this is not a bad team whatsoever. Let's look at it. Offensively speaking, not a lot of major changes. You kept Darius Slayton. Of course, Theo Johnson steps into a bigger role. Basically the same offensive line, but of course, the big story here is going to be Jackson Dart. Is he going to be the starting quarterback come next year? I don't know. And then defensively speaking, Paulson Adebo. Pair that with now Abdul Carter, who I can't find. Abdul Carter right here. I mean, this is a really good team. Javon Holland as well. This was a Giants team that for years now has been kind of putting the pieces together. It was not a very good team 3 years ago, and every single year with Brian Daboll, they've made good moves after good moves after good moves. Of course, the only one that is kind of the lingering bad move was the Daniel Jones contract and probably getting rid of Saquon, but at the same time, might have been a necessary evil. But every year, they've just made the right decisions in terms of putting the pieces together of building a good roster. The only question for this team is, what does the quarterback room look like? It's been the question for the New York Giants for a lot of years now. I mean, I think Russell Wilson or Jameis will start for you, but at what point are they going to say, you know what, we got to put Jackson Dart in there? And is Jackson Dart truly the guy? I don't know. I was not high on Jackson Dart, but I'm definitely willing to see it out. But outside of the quarterback room, you get a significant upgrade in more of a bruiser style back in Cam Scatterbo, who I think is kind of the perfect running back to pair with Tyrone Tracy. In your receiving core, it's the same basically unit from last year. Darius Slayton comes back as a nice little upgrade. Would have liked to have seen them draft a tight end a bit earlier, like, I don't know, round 3, but it didn't really fall their way. Offensive line remains the same. Hopefully the interior can survive. I definitely do think next year I might want to see an upgrade within the interior. Marcus Simbo, of course, maybe could get a start. I definitely think he's talented, but yeah, I would like to maybe see like one more serious addition on the interior of the offensive line, which they didn't really address outside of Marcus and Bo. But man, hey, look, this defense is going to be nasty. It's going to be a good defense. I mean, you get Dexter Lawrence, you brought in Darius Alexander, which I thought was a good move. Chauncey Golston in the offseason, he had a nice year for Dallas. Brian Burns, Abdul Carter, Kayvon Thibodeau's not even a starter for this team anymore. Like, he's going to be coming off the bench fresh and ready to go. And he's probably going to be pretty motivated. We'll see if he gets traded. He might get traded. But if he doesn't, he's going to be motivated to put a lot of good film on and try to get a nice contract extension for a new team probably. Your interior linebackers are still basically the same. Bobby Okereke, Micah McFadden, good players. Some big-time upgrades in the secondary. Paulson Adebo, that's a huge upgrade over Flott, who just frankly has not put it all together. Tyler Nubin, Javon Holland is a massive upgrade from what they had last year. And then Deonte Banks is kind of, for me, Banks is kind of the thing that could really finish up this team. Because Andrew Phillips, or just Drew Phillips, I believe he goes by now, is a great player. He had a really nice rookie season. Deonte Banks was their first-round pick a few years ago, hasn't put it together yet. And I think this is the year where he doesn't have to be the cornerback one because you already have a Debo and the safeties are really good. So this is the year where Deonte Banks kind of has to make or break. If he has a good year, sweet. You have a great cornerback two next to Paulson Adebo. If it doesn't work out though, they're probably going to be looking for a replacement maybe as soon as the trade deadline because this is a team that, let's be honest, they have to win. Brian Dable has to find a way to win or he's probably going to get cut. Same with the GM. This team needs to win. And if they have a weak point in one spot, they're probably going to look to address it. So in totality, last year, I thought the roster was fine. It just needed a quarterback. This year, I think they have some answers at quarterback. I'm not terribly confident in them, but the roster around him is just super dominant. I'm excited to see Abdul Carter in a Giants uniform. That's going to look great on him with Brian Burns. It's just going to be nasty. So yeah, it's just a really good team with a lot of good pieces and a great offseason. Next up, let's move on to the Chicago Bears. Let's be honest. We could have said the exact same thing last year. I mean, in fact, I probably did, but it didn't really work out. This team still had a top 10 pick and they weren't great last year, but some significant upgrades across the roster. Let's just be honest. Ben Johnson is a much better coach than Matt Eberflus. Now, granted, we haven't seen it on paper, but I think it's a pretty fair statement to say that regardless of what he is as a time manager and what he might be as a roster constructor, as a pure coach, especially an offensive-minded coach, he's one of the best in the NFL. Now, I will say, Matt Eberflus wasn't a great offensive coach, nor time manager, nor this and that. He was a pretty dang good defensive coach. So we'll see what Ben Johnson looks like. Can he manage the clock? Can he put a good roster together? All this and that. But I feel confident enough in him to feel pretty good that he's going to be a good coach. I mean, he was with Dan Campbell for all those years, learning behind him, and Dan Campbell was one of the best coaches in the NFL. So in totality, big time upgrade in the coaching staff. But the roster, man, it looks very good. Obviously, the big storyline of the offseason has been, well, at least for the Bears, the improvements on the offensive line. Joe Thuney, one of the best guards in the NFL. Drew Dalman, a really good center, especially run blocking. He's really dominant. And Jonah Jackson is obviously just a stud as well, when healthy, of course. You also bring in Ozzie, who likely will come in behind Darnell Wright. Not sure why ESPN has him ranked right in front of him. And then on defense, Dayo Odoyingbo, really good disruptor. Shamar Turner, somebody you're going to try to develop behind him. Also, Austin Booker, you're also hoping to develop too. And yeah, that's basically everything they did in the offseason. Oh, by the way, Luther Burden, Coastal Loveland. How do I forget about those guys? It's just because this team didn't really have a lot they had to do in the draft. So what did they do? They went with their big board. They went with who was the best player available on our big board. And I'm sure Coastal Loveland was probably the best available when they got to 10. And they took him, and they're going to have some nasty 12 personnel. Luther Burden fell right into their laps in the second round. They did not overthink it. They just took Luther Burden, who was probably the highest on their big board. Let's be honest, Caleb doesn't really have any excuses at this point. Yes, he still has to develop. I'm not willing to give up on him if he has a okay year next year. Like, we have to give him time. But there's not really a major flaw in this team. Like, it's a really complete team, especially on the offensive end. I will say, I would have liked to have seen them pick up another running back. They did bring in Kyle Monangai, who his skill set kind of works nicely with DeAndre Swift because Kyle's just kind of a bruisier style. But I don't know. I'm just not a big DeAndre Swift guy. I really would have liked to have seen this team, instead of Luther Burden, maybe go with like a running back. I can't remember exactly who was available at the time, but I'm sure they had a lot of opportunities to take a running back, but they did not. That was the one complaint I definitely did have with their draft, is just, I don't know, finding an upgrade over DeAndre Swift to me would have been priority number one, but they didn't. And obviously, maybe like they go for a Nick Chubb, who I think would be fun on this team. But regardless, and the receiving core is just filthy. DJ Moore, Omadunze, who you're expecting a big year two out of. Luther Burden can play inside and outside, very similar in a lot of ways to DJ Moore. Again, 12 personnel will be nasty with Loveland and Kmet. Offensive line is significantly better. You're just hoping that those tackles, especially Darnell Wright, can continue to get better. Defensively, this was already a solid unit last year, especially just personnel-wise. I feel like once the coach left, everything kind of went down the tube, but you got a new defensive coordinator in there that you're hoping will step up and put this defense together. But it's just a really good, complete secondary with a lot of good pieces, good linebackers, and now your front seven just feels a little bit more complete with some new edge rushers. So while I didn't love their draft because I felt like they were just having a little bit too much fun picking receivers and weapons and pieces they really didn't need, I would have preferred running back and maybe another edge rusher. Regardless, though, this team is good. It's really good. They're going to be a fantastic roster next year. They're going to be a good team. And unlike last year where we said they were going to be a good team and then they ended up kind of not being very good last year, I think this is the year they put it all together. New head coach, second year in quarterback, improved roster with improved continuity. This team should be good. I have a lot of faith in them. But then lastly, the last team I want to talk about, and by the way, every single team improved. It's not like these are the only teams that improved. Every team improved. Whenever you take good picks in the draft, you're going to improve. But these are the ones that I think improved the most. The biggest one to me was the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, this was a team last year, let's just be honest, was very disappointing. We all kind of knew with the coaching staff and with the quarterback play that it probably wasn't going to be the greatest year ever. But I think we expected a little bit more, especially with how Gardner Minshew looked with the Colts last year. But it was just a disaster. Now, Aiden O'Connell, I thought, kind of steadied the ship. And I think he's a good backup quarterback who has some potential to be a long-term starter. We'll see. Don't think it'll happen, but it could potentially happen. But in this offseason, man, they really put things together quite nicely. Let's look at the offense first, because this is the unit for sure that definitely took the biggest step forward. Geno Smith at quarterback, significant upgrade. Ashton Jeanty at running back, significant upgrade. Receiving core, you bring in Jack Betch, who I think can do a little bit of some underneath stuff, intermediate stuff, play within the slot. Big time upgrade in this receiving core, and I low-key kind of like this trio, though I want to see maybe a bit more of like a true go-getter on the outside. Maybe next year or in the year afterwards they can find that guy. Brock Bowers is a freaking stud. Offensive line is basically the same, but you bring in some guys like Caleb Rogers and Charles Grant, who you're hopefully going to be able to develop. Offensively, it's a very similar unit to last year, but you do bring in a Landon Roberts. Obviously, Christian Wilkins gets healthy, and a couple other changes were made like Jeremy Chin. But this team is just pretty solid on paper. I think the biggest upgrades for this team was offensively speaking. I mean, Geno Smith is a genuine top 15 quarterback in the league, and he is a major upgrade over Gardner Minshew. He should steady the ship big time. Jeanty, I feel like I don't even have to talk about it because last year they were running out there with Alexander Madison, Cecile McCormick, and just some really nasty running backs that were still getting playing time. Jeanty is a significant upgrade. Like, he is, in year one, likely going to be maybe a top 5 running back early, if not top 5, top 10 for sure. And he's just going to get better and better and better. Jack Betch, I love Jack Betch. They took him in the second round. I thought it was a little early for him, but man, I think it's a good fit here. Him with Geno Smith should be kind of nice. And then Brock Bowers in year 2, continue his development with Michael Mayer and that 12 personnel. Solid enough offensive line to get the job done with some nice young depth behind them that maybe could end up being your starters at some point. And then defensively, you had a good defense last year that was feisty. You did lose a couple pieces that I would have liked to have seen them keep, like Trevon Moehrig and Robert Spillane, but you replace those guys with some good people like Jeremy Chin and Landon Roberts. So I think the defense may take a step back, but I think in some ways you can make up some of the issues with the defense with how good this offense is going to be. And don't get me wrong, this Raiders team is not going to go from, a top 10 pick to now all of a sudden being a contender for a championship. No, but I think they will be pushing for a playoff spot. And I think next year you just kind of have to put the finishing pieces on the roster. Go add another corner. Maybe look at the offensive line. Maybe look at another receiver. But in totality, Geno Smith is really going to help this team. And I didn't even mention the coaching staff. Like going from Antonio Pierce to Pete Carroll is like a huge upgrade. Pete Carroll, veteran in the game, did it in college, did it with the Seahawks, has been great for many, many years. And we'll compare that with Antonio Pierce, who I thought was a good experiment. He brought a little bit of some more swagger and juice to the Raiders. But now you kind of throw it back to somebody a bit more traditional who knows what he's doing. He knows how to run an operation. And I think this team should look a lot better next year. But you guys let me know in the comment section below what team is the most improved team from last year. And I love you guys. Peace.